Hey everyone. In this video I want to talk to you about the bravery of soldiers. This is something that completely fascinates me because it's almost something that when you look on it from the outside, it's really difficult to understand because I'll take it from my perspective. I love being alive so freaking much that the thought of me sacrificing that for something greater than me that isn't like people I truly care about, it's tough for me to kind of wrap my head around. Like, coming from an outside perspective, a lot of people would probably argue that soldiers aren't actually fighting for their citizens, but they're fighting for their governments and politicians. But that's not obviously true when you think about it from the perspective of the soldiers, because they probably wouldn't be over in foreign countries fighting if they thought they were doing it for politicians or their government. They probably don't care about those institutions enough to truly put their lives on the line for them. But they will care enough about the citizens that they're protecting, their loved ones back home, or when you really drill it down, what they care the most about are the men next to them, the guys fighting side by side with them out there in the hellhole, a war zone that they don't really want to be in. But they're there looking out for each other, and at some point they almost start developing brotherly bonds together, that camaraderie that comes from literally your life being on the line and all of you being in the same position, where that's the case for all of you. You're all in this horrible environment that isn't friendly at all, and people are trying to kill you, and your whole goal is to survive. It fascinates me how, I don't know the exact numbers on this, of course. I don't even know if it's possible to find out, but it seems like a lot of men become incredibly brave in war zones. And it's really interesting. It's really admirable. Now, I'll admit, what inspired me to even discuss this was watching Black Hawk Down again for like the fourth or fifth time. It's one of my favorite war movies, and every time I watch it, it always makes me think about the perspective of soldiers and how crazy it is for them to be in those positions and for them to then be brave, to stand up in the face of incredible odds of them getting hurt. Like, these guys will put their lives on the line to protect the men next to them. It's crazy to even think about. So yeah, I wanted to discuss this because it's just something that, I mean, I've already made one video on war talking about why I believe a lot of men are fascinated by it, because of how we often ask ourselves, how would we show up in a war zone? Would we be brave ourselves, or would we be cowards? What would we do? And you never really know the answer to that question until you're in the situation, which I imagine many men who even ponder that question probably aren't all going to actually end up in a war situation, because you have to volunteer for that nowadays, and not many people do that anymore. So it's really interesting. And I do need to get out the way, though. I'm not saying like all soldiers are admirable people. I understand there are a lot of bad people who end up in warfare situations. There are people who go in there with really bad intentions, not because they want to protect the man next to them or be a hero or anything like that, but because they have a bit more sinister things going on. Or even sometimes there can be people who have certain parts of their brain that may have been wired a bit differently, like talking about people who don't feel as much empathy and whatnot, so they'd actually look at killing others as a joyful experience. But I imagine that's going to be a very small percentage of soldiers. In fact, it's probably ridiculously small, because I don't even know if they would allow people like that to even get deployed anymore. I imagine hopefully they do some sort of psych evals, but I don't know. I've never delved into that myself, so I do not know. But I have always just found it fascinating how war can help men rise up and become better. Obviously, it's not exactly the best environment for that to happen. It's not the best route for a man to try to prove himself. But it's just one that when men find themselves in that position, it's interesting to see who ends up rising up to the occasion, who ends up becoming a hero, but not by choice. I mean, even in Black Hawk Down, at the end of the movie, one of the characters, Sergeant Eversman, he is talking to one of his fallen comrades, basically kind of sharing some final thoughts with his fallen comrade before the body's going to get shipped off, probably back to the parents and whatnot. And he's basically telling this comrade that, hey, it's interesting how heroes aren't exactly chosen. Like, people don't go into warfare wanting to become a hero. It's more so they become one, like by circumstance, kind of. Like, they don't decide. It's not a conscious choice for them to rise up and be a hero. It's more so that circumstances create heroes out of them. And it was a really interesting quote in that movie, something that stood out to me because it's true, right? Like, one example that stands out to me the most, that kind of goes in line with that quote, is during the whole Black Hawk Down situation, which was actually a real thing. It's not just a movie. The movie was based on something that happened in real life. You had 2 Black Hawk helicopters that went down. They were shot down by RPGs in Mogadishu. So I won't get into everything here, but basically men were trying to save anyone who survived those crashes and then dispose of the helicopter so that the enemy couldn't make use of that technology. And when the second helicopter was shot down, it was shot down so far away from the rest of the men that nobody was going to be able to get there in time to really save anyone who survived the crash. And there was a little bird, which is basically a small helicopter that has room for maybe around like 8 people or so. So it's really tiny. There was one in the area that had 2 Delta Force operatives named Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, who were snipers, and they were providing sniper cover from up in the sky in that little bird. And they asked permission if they could go down on foot and protect, or should I say defend, the crash site of that second helicopter that went down. Now remember, nobody else is around. Like, this crash site was so far away from the rest of the people that they knew they probably weren't going to get any help for like maybe even hours. They weren't exactly sure how long it would take. So these 2 guys were basically signing up for a suicide mission because they were probably going to run out of ammo. And even if they didn't, there was just the 2 of them against an entire city of Somalian militants who all had like AK-47s and whatnot. So the odds were against them. They even probably knew when they asked permission to go down that it was a suicide mission. Heck, everybody was asking them, are you sure you want to do this? And they said they did, and they were let down there. And they ended up defending that crash site for as long as they could, and they both posthumously won the Medal of Honor for their actions, which that is basically, if you don't know what the Medal of Honor is, it's like the highest award that a soldier can get for their service. Literally, the president of the US is the person who gives them the Medal of Honor. Like, they're the ones who puts it around their neck for their service. It's the highest award anyone can get. And these guys, unfortunately, didn't live, but they got that Medal of Honor because of how brave they were. I mean, imagine that scenario. Knowing you probably weren't going to come out of that alive, but you volunteer to defend someone who is defenseless. The pilot survived that crash, but he had a broken back. There was nothing he could do to protect himself in that situation. Nothing he could do to try to increase his odds of survival. If Gordon and Shugart hadn't volunteered to go down there, God only knows what would have happened to the pilot. He probably would have died. And I know you can make your arguments about like 2 lives for 1 or whatever. It doesn't matter. To them, they wanted to defend one of their brothers in arms, a guy who couldn't defend himself. And the pilot did actually end up surviving, as far as I know. He was taken as a prisoner for a while, but the US ended up getting him back and doing their little bartering and whatnot. Or maybe it wasn't even bartering. Maybe they send in people to get him. I forget exactly what it is. But the pilot survived, as far as I know. So it's interesting. Whenever I watch Black Hawk Down, I always think about the perspectives of Gordon and Shugart, and it's crazy to me to volunteer for a suicide mission like that. It's hard for me to fathom because, as I said earlier, I love being alive so much that like the thought of signing up for a situation you're probably not going to come out of alive it's crazy to me. I'd probably do it for people I really care about, but that's like talking about my future wife and future children. Like, I couldn't imagine doing it for anyone else, but I've never been in those situations either. So it's something I admire. I admire that bravery that men can sometimes acquire during insane times like times of war. And I mean, I'm not making an argument here for whether or not war is good or any of that crap, so please don't read into this. I hate it when people do that crap and put words in my mouth. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying from a psychological perspective, I find this interesting. I find it fascinating. It's one of those things. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this video. It's just me yet again delving into war. I've already made another video on it. I forget what the title of that one was, but yeah, it's a fascinating subject, at least for us men. I don't know how women view it. They probably don't find it nearly as fascinating, but there's just something to it, something about defending the people you care about, and the way it can help men rise up and become heroes, even though they don't choose to be heroes, but the circumstances kind of pull it out of them. The circumstances are a catalyst for them becoming heroes. Like Shugard and Gordon, they're heroes. They saved that pilot by their actions. They probably didn't choose to be heroes. I highly doubt they did that because they wanted to be remembered as heroes. They did it because they wanted to protect their brother-in-arms, especially knowing that he was going to die if they didn't step in. So it's just fascinating to think about. But anyway, that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this in the comment section below. I mean, it's just an interesting topic in my opinion. But yeah, that's all I have for you. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Arrivederci!